Welcome back to the City Current Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Park. We're always honored to bring you inspiring stories of individuals and organizations making a difference, empowering the good, and also, too, talking about servant leadership. We're honored to be joined by Dr. Philip Mathew. We're going to be diving into his book, Global Servant Leadership, Wisdom, Love, and Legitimate Power in the Age of Chaos. And so our theme, our topic for today is servant leadership. Dr. Mathew is also program director and professor of the new Bachelor of Applied Arts and Sciences program in organizational leadership at Weatherford College in Weatherford, Texas, which is where I grew up. And so we're going to have a lot of fun on this conversation. Let's go ahead and dive in. Dr. Mathew, how are you doing?
Hi, Jeremy. Great to be with you today. Greetings from Weatherford College in Weatherford, Texas. It's an honor to be with you today.
So let's go ahead and start with a little bit of your background and your story and what brought you to Weatherford College.
Well, sure. We moved here from the Seattle, Washington area just a few months ago. So I was teaching at a community college as a tenured professor there for just over 10 years. And I also lived in Spokane, where I taught at Whitworth University as well. So we wanted to be closer to family. And so my kids, so they can be closer to their cousins, we decided to move here to North Texas. And it's been great to be here so far. I'm really enjoying the warm weather. We get a lot of rain in Seattle. And so like they say, people in the Northwest, they don't tan, they rust. And so I'm happy to be here, and everyone has just been so welcoming and warm in Southern hospitality, and I've loved that.
Talk about launching this new program, because you were able to launch it prior, and that was a huge success on your end, and now bringing that to Weatherford College. Talk about kind of where you start to lay this foundation to build out this program.
Yeah, well, the great thing about community colleges, which I love their mission, community colleges are open access institutions. So everyone can go there, anyone can go there. And I really love that. That's something that's close to my heart. More and more, we're seeing that community colleges have this opportunity to prepare a pathway for students beyond the associate's degree. And so they can earn an affordable, accredited degree right here locally, a local pathway to a bachelor's degree. And especially for students who have technical degrees, we can use their technical credits and build a pathway to a bachelor's degree by adding 2 years in organizational leadership and management just for them.
Paint the picture of some of the things. When you talk about organizational leadership, what does that entail? Talk about some of the skill sets, the experiences that then will lead the students to new opportunities.
Yeah, so organizational leadership is having a deep understanding of how organizations function, how they operate. So often what we have is organizations have individual roles for people. You maybe have people in accounting, people in finance, people in communication, people in media. And so the role of the organizational leader is bringing all those diverse people together and having them row in the same direction, move in the same direction, and accomplishing great things together. And so that's what an organizational leader does. And so we focus on that, and we focus on the fundamental skills, such as how do you build a high performance team? How do you manage conflict? How do you negotiate? How do you lead people effectively so you can motivate them to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish? And so all those skill sets come together under the umbrella of organizational leadership. And so we can see that there's no organization in this world today that can't function well without leadership. And so leadership really is the wings, I like to say, that helps an organization to soar.
And I think that parlays perfectly into the book. And so the book is Global Servant Leadership, Wisdom, Love, and Legitimate Power in the Age of Chaos. I love that title, especially in the age of chaos. So carry that forward in terms of leadership into what led you to write this book and be a part of this book.
Yeah, so this particular book came together in my role as an peer reviewer with the International Journal of Servant Leadership, published through Gonzaga University. and the Spear Center for Servant Leadership. So I did my doctorate at Gonzaga, and one of the great things about Gonzaga, they have an internationally known focus on servant leadership. And so in 2005, Dr. Shann Ferch and Larry Spears, who's probably the most well-known practitioner and scholar of servant leadership today, launched the International Journal of Servant Leadership. And the goal was to provide a voice and awareness for servant leadership, both here in North America and for voices around the world. And so I worked together with Dr. Ferch, Dr. Jiying Song, who's a professor of business and economics at Northwestern College, and Larry Spears to put together this anthology. And our goal was to compile international perspectives on servant leadership through essays, case studies, and the latest research, bringing together contributors from around the globe. And so we brought together thought leaders for more than 24 thought leaders and practitioners representing different countries, cultures, communities, and they're all at the forefront of the study and practice of servant leadership. And so some of the countries and contexts represented in the book, Brazil, Canada, China, India, Kenya, Saudi Arabia, Tanzania, Turkey, South Africa, the Tunaha Nation here in the United States, which you can find them in Canada and the Pacific Northwest. And so we have this collective of global intelligence that came together in this book.
Very, very cool. So I think of servant leadership in the realm of actions speak louder than words. You should be, serving and putting others first. You're community minded. You're giving back. Those are things to me that I relate to servant leadership. How do you, especially given the context of this and the variety of the different countries and cultures, how do you start to describe servant leadership?
Well, servant leadership is really one thing we have to understand that the book really brings to the fore is that it's an ancient philosophy of leading. So this is not something that's really new. But you can see that servant leaders have been found from the beginning of time and in all cultures, in all countries and all contexts. And so one of my co-editors, Jiying Song, she writes in the book about how in ancient China the best leaders were seen as servant leaders, as someone who didn't have to be in the spotlight, but brings out the best in others. And so our goal with the book really was to provide flesh and blood examples of what servant leadership looks like. Warren Bennett said that leadership is like beauty. It's hard to define, but you know it when you see it. And so I think servant leadership is like that. Sometimes we talk about it in the abstract, but our goal was to say, okay, this is what servant leadership looks like in action. And so servant leadership, essentially, it's an others-oriented style of leading. The focus is on other people, and it's manifested through prioritizing the needs and interests of followers. And so in servant leadership, we have a movement away from the self and toward other people, toward organizations, toward the community, and even the world. And so servant leadership, in a nutshell, it differs from conventional leadership styles that tend toward dominance, hierarchy, self-interest. Oftentimes in traditional leadership, it's a top-down approach. And so what servant leadership does, rather than become hierarchical, where the leader is at the top of the organization and looking down on everyone else, servant leadership, what it likes to do, it inverts the pyramid. It turns the pyramid upside down. So the leader is at the bottom, serving everyone else in the organization. And so essentially in servant leadership, and I like what Dr. Shann Ferch says, he refers to it as a reversal of power. It reverses what we normally think about leadership and power because it puts people first. And so we have a dual commitment there to serving and leading, but the servant leader serves first. And so you're leading and serving at the same time. And so the leader, after providing the direction and the mission, steps back and puts the people forward. So you're leading, you're serving, you're investing and empowering your people. And really, a central notion to servant leadership is this idea of stewardship. A servant leader is a steward because you're seeing followers as people who are entrusted to you. And your job as a leader is to elevate them, to empower them to become their better self. And amazingly, what we find is when we put people first, they turn out to be more engaged and more effective, which benefits the organization.
Absolutely. Well, and I love all the words you're using: empowering, enlightening, investing. Like those are things that, to your point, like those are going to have a high payoff in return, because to your point, you're pouring into people. And when you pour into people, great things have an opportunity to happen. What's maybe one or two of when you look at the lessons learned, obviously, and how to bring servant leadership to life, like kind of some of the practical pieces, the blocking and tackling, if you will. What's one example of something that someone can kind of implement programmatically to be more in line with servant leadership?
Well, servant leadership in the modern day really is based on the work of Robert Greenleaf. He's the modern day architect of servant leadership, and he was an executive at AT&T. And he put servant leadership practices to work in the business world. And so we see today that there's many organizations, sometimes that we're not aware of this, that are practicing servant leadership. You have Southwest Airlines, for example, Herb Kelleher. He was a person who really espoused servant leadership. TD Industries, Starbucks. Just last week in the Wall Street Journal, the CEO of Nike said that the main leadership philosophy that he embodies is servant leadership. And so Larry Spears, one of my co-editors, what he's known for especially is a study that he did back in 1995, where he studied Robert Greenleaf's writings. And what he did is, after studying his writings, he identified 10 characteristics of servant leadership. And this is where you can see, how can we practice this? What does servant leadership look like in the real world? And these are the 10 characteristics. I'll list those briefly for you. First one is listening. So servant leaders are great listeners. And this is something that, Daniel Goleman, who's known for his work on emotional intelligence, called listening the common cold of leadership. And so active listening, it starts with that. And then empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, conceptualization, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people. And the 10th characteristic is building community. And so a simple way is to look at those 10 characteristics and start maybe just by focusing on listening, becoming a better listener. And through that, amazing things can really happen. It's amazing how much we learn when we begin to listen to others.
Yeah, and I think that's a big piece, is when you talk about communicating and listening, are you just communicating, or are you communicating for understanding? Are you listening, and are you listening for understanding? And even on my end, I mean, as a media host, I'll never forget one of the other personalities we were talking. And she said, sometimes it's really hard. She hosts TV shows and podcasts. She says it's really hard sometimes to give someone kind of the empty space. But she's like, I found if I just sit back and listen, and I'm willing to just literally just put everything on them and just listen and let them soul search, that's when the magic happens. And I think many times we get caught in, we don't want this dead space. We don't want, we don't know what to say. But we're just going to start talking, versus, to your point, listen, let them have their space, and let the magic come out by letting them have that space. So listening, to me, is a big piece of this, especially when we're trying to understand and put ourselves in their shoes to understand the situation, that then leads to empathy and some of the other things, and healing. So there's a whole process that plays out.
Exactly. That's a great point.
What's an aha moment, or was there one when you're going through and doing the book? Were there any aha moments for you where you're like, wow, I never thought of that, or wow, that really changes the way I look at things?
Yeah. So the wonderful thing about this book, like I said, we're bringing together, thought leaders from around the world. and especially from non-Western countries. And so really the mission, the goal of the book was to expand the lens, because leadership is so much more than we often realize outside the Western context. And so especially people today, whether you're in business, whether you're a student, it's important to understand that leadership in the 21st century is global. We're interconnected, we're interdependent, and more leadership is an international work. And so we have to be able to understand and work across borders, across countries, and build bridges with people. And so we saw servant leadership in action in the business world, in the boardrooms of Brazil, in faith communities, in classrooms in Singapore, in Canada, in China. There's a chapter with Nelson Mandela and his leadership there in South Africa, in the Native American community here in the United States. And I wrote a chapter on servant leadership in India, and how during right after the British had left India, how a servant leader there, Patel, brought together a country without bloodshed through the power of servant leadership. And, you know, I would say probably one of my favorite chapters from the book, and this is the book right here. One of my favorite chapters from the book is just 1 page long. It's right in the middle of the book, and I wanted to make sure to include it. And I'll just share this really briefly with you. This is a chapter written by Muzabel Walongo, and he's a social entrepreneur, and he received his Master of Global Human Development from Georgetown University. What's also amazing about Muzabel is that he spent 21 years in refugee camps in Tanzania and Kenya as a refugee. And he tells a story. He's from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And he tells a story in the book about one day he was visiting his uncle in a village in Congo. And the people there were experiencing a drought. And they had gone 5 days without water. The river had become muddy. They couldn't drink the water. And they were struggling there for 5 days. And finally, someone found a source of water. And so everybody in the village headed over to this place, to this tap, to fill up their jugs of water. And he said there's this, what he called the servant of the tap. And he commanded everybody to stand in a line, and everyone could only get about 20 liters of water, which is about 5 gallons. And that was for an entire family. And so they were served, they had to get in line. They were served on a first come, first served basis. And Muzabel Walongo, he was the last person in line. And so he said, I had to wait in line because we had no water to prepare food at home. And he said, in the line, there was an old woman behind him. Just as he got in line, there's an old woman right behind him. And she was frail. She looked vulnerable. And so what he did, and nobody in the line wanted to let her go forward. So what he did, he left his place in line and he went to the person who was in charge of the tap and asked him to help the old woman. And that man said, okay. And he gave her a chance to fill her container without having to wait. And so when Muzabel went back to take his place in line, his place was already taken, and he had to go way back to the end of the line. And I'll just read what he said. The time I wasted to help that woman was a grace that day. I stayed at the end of the waiting line, waiting for my turn. Touched by my kindness toward the old woman, the tap servant allowed me to fetch water immediately, and all my containers were filled. And then he says this, honesty and patience are essential when waiting in line. With patience, people at the tap said, I'm kind and honest. Flexibility is also important. We all suffered from lack of water, but some of us were more vulnerable than others. I made sure my neighbors on the line are served just as I wanted to be served.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just a powerful, simple story that really illustrates the power of servant leadership. And one of the aha moments from the book really is this idea of the power of collaborative shared leadership. Because oftentimes in the Western context, we have a very individualized leadership ethos. It's about me. It's about who gets the credit. It's about that internal locus of control. But what we find is the vast majority of people around the world, they live in societies where the interest of the group prevails over the interest of the individual. And so servant leadership is about a collectivist mindset. Instead of how do I move together or move by myself, it becomes how do we move together? How do we move collectively? And how can we be responsible together? And I think that was one of the powerful takeaways from the book.
Yeah, you're one of those that we're going to have you come back often, especially because I'm thinking there's so many nuances we can talk about in terms of like, how does social media impact servant leadership and, the me versus we philosophy and all of these things. But wrap up on your end with where everyone can get the book. So obviously that's a big piece of this is where can we go to get the book? Talk about that. And then also too, just where can we follow you and your efforts? Where can we go to learn more about your efforts at Weatherford College as well?
I appreciate that, Jeremy. Well, the book is available on Amazon and other retailers. It's in hardback right now, but the publisher is going to be putting out a paperback version soon. It's also available on Kindle and other ebook formats. And you can find more about, you want to get in touch with me. I'm here teaching at Weatherford College. And it's been great to be associated here with Weatherford. We are the oldest continuing educational institution west of the Mississippi River. We were established in 1869. And so there's some great things happening at Weatherford. We have a new emerging technologies and workforce building that's going to be coming online next year. We have bachelor degree programs. We have a Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree that was launched last year. My program, which is the organizational leadership degree. We also have other bachelor programs coming up very soon. And like I said, everyone is welcome here at Weatherford College. I think we have world-class faculty, staff, deans, and most importantly, our students. We have scholars and student athletes, all under the leadership of Dr. Todd Allen Farmer. He's our president, and he has the presidential values of faith, hope, and love. And I think our students and our faculty and staff really embody that. So you can find us here at Weatherford, and you're welcome to contact me anytime.
The website for Weatherford College is wc.edu. So it's the initials wc.edu. That's an easy place to go and learn more about Weatherford College. My family and I have a long legacy with Weatherford College. My brother and I grew up playing tennis on those tennis courts. We were both students there. My uncle ran the bookstore. My dad does the Boy Scout merit badge colleges there. So long history and legacy. Absolutely love Weatherford College. So Dr. Mathew, thank you for all you do, for coming on the show and sharing your expertise and talking all about global servant leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy.